robot in other areas of the body. But in the brain, the tools have to be much smaller than going to other areas of the body. And visualization is quite difficult. And so a minimally invasive approach is not commonly used for brain surgery. We need smaller tools, and they need to be very dexterous. So they need to have wrist joints on them, so multiple degrees of freedom of motion that we can control from the outside. You're likely familiar with surgical robots. Maybe you've seen videos of this surgical robot called the Da Vinci surgical robot, which is used in the abdomen of the body primarily. And it has these fantastic wristed grasping and cutting tools. And these are driven by pulleys. So there are cables running down the length of this tool from a large set of motors outside the body. And of course, it's just this is just a demonstration on a piece of fruit, a grape here. But you can see the great dexterity that these tools have. And by dexterity, I mean they have a lot of precision. They can move the tool tips through any three-dimensional motion, position, and orientation of these tips with a lot of fine control, enough to do something like suturing up skin or a wound site in the body. So how can we make tools like this, instead of having centimeter-sized tools like these, can we make these down to millimeter size, so a few times smaller? And I've been exploring this idea in my group. Can we use magnetic fields to move and control tiny tools in the body? So I'm going to show you how we've been doing this to make millimeter-sized devices. First, I'm going to take a little break from talking about the brain, which is a very challenging, ambitious target for us. And first, we're going to talk about going into the gastrointestinal tract, which is actually a significantly easier task for some types of procedures. So I've mentioned magnetic fields. We like to use magnetic fields because they provide remote forces and torque. So we can pull things and we can twist them using a magnetic field. Magnetic field can be exerted over the whole human body. So centimeters up to meters distance, we can project magnetic fields. We can't send magnetic fields over distances of many meters, but going into the body, we can do this. We can have field sources like this one, which generate magnetic fields. And magnetic fields will penetrate through the tissue of your body. We work with low frequency magnetic fields. So cycle times, a few cycles per second. So we don't get magnetic field interaction with the body at all. And so your body is transparent to these low frequency magnetic fields. And this allows us to control devices in the lab. We can control devices in the body in a very similar way. And I'm not going to show many equations in my talk, but these two equations here, if you'd like to think about those, we have magnetic torque. If we put a tiny magnet inside the body, on a tool inside the body, that's going to be this M vector. And if we apply a magnetic field B from an external source, like these coils, we get these two effects. We get a torque, which tries to align tiny magnets with that field. That's like a compass needle, aligns with the magnetic field. And independently, this magnet will be pulled towards regions of higher field strength. So this operation here, this del B, is a field gradient. So you can think about this, roughly speaking, as magnets get pulled towards regions of higher field strength, and they're twisted to align with the magnetic field. So this coil system here is not practical for use in the body. It's too small, and you can't put your body inside here. But I'll show you how we can generate fields going into the body. And so our approach to make tiny tools down to millimeter size or smaller is let's remove all of the onboard power and actuation, things that you might think of. Typical robots are going to have batteries, motors, cables, pulleys, all this type of thing on board and computation. Let's remove all of that from the device so we can make it simple and small. And then we're going to deliver all this from outside the body just using the magnetic field. Okay, so to show you how we do this, I'm going to start with a demonstration system, which is a gripping robot, which we've developed, which shows the principle of how we can use this magnetic field actuation to drive tools. Then I'm going to go back to our two applications later in the talk. So this little animation here shows what we can do with magnetic fields. And I'll show you a video of an experiment in a moment. But you can see that this gripping device can open and close. It can orient itself, point in any direction, and we can pull it in 3 dimensions. And we can do all of this with the magnetic field using those equations I showed before and using a magnetic coil system like I showed. We can make a device like this that's functional and can fold up and move by having a bunch of different magnets patterned in specific locations along this robot. So this gripper here consists of a bunch of rigid magnetic base blocks, which are connected by flexible hinges made out of flexible rubber material. We can fabricate these pretty small, millimeter size. This is half a millimeter, is 500 microns. So we can make them quite small. We typically mold them from polymers and rubbers and magnetic particles in our lab. And we can magnetize each segment of the robot, each segment of the gripper, to have a different magnetization vector. These red vectors you can think about like south to north pole of each vector, of each block of this micro gripper. So when we apply a magnetic field, all of these segments are going to try to align with that magnetic field. Each one behaves like a little compass needle, and they'll try to align. And the effect is we apply the field and the gripper closes. Now, really, the field has 3 components. It has the strength, the direction of the magnetic field, and the shape. And we can generate all of these components of the magnetic field using a bunch of electromagnets outside the body. And we can control different aspects of the motion. So the strength of the field is going to open and close the gripper. The direction of the magnetic field applied is going to orient the gripper or point it in any direction. And the shape of the field, or the gradient of the magnetic field vector, is going to pull the gripper in different directions. So here you see we can get something like 6 independent inputs to our gripper. And all of this is with a magnetic field. And using mathematical modeling of magnetic coils, we can control each aspect of this magnetic field to do all of these things independently. So if I want to close the gripper and move it to the right, I can do that. And I can calculate electromagnetic currents in those coils. If we have 6 or 8 or more electromagnets, we can calculate all the electrical currents required to create these inputs. We like to model that control problem as a linear problem. It's not always linear, but it's nice when it is. If we have electrical currents I, we can multiply them by some complex matrix, which tells us about the geometry of the coils. And then that will generate fields and magnetic forces on our system. So we can calculate this all usually using linear algebra and calculate coil currents. This is the experimental system we use to demonstrate our micro gripper. We have a camera viewing from the top and the side. You'll see views like this of the device. So here's a video of the device operating. Here's the gripper sitting on the ground to start. There's a little cargo here. It's just a piece of plastic in the shape of a triangle. From the side view, you can see there's this wall, and the gripper and cargo are here, and they're going to carry it up over the wall. So this is a real-time video. And this is actually autonomously controlled. So we have a basic computer vision algorithm running, which tracks the gripper location. Now it's picked up that cargo, and we can apply magnetic field gradients and levitate the gripper and move it over the wall to transport the cargo. So this demonstrates what we're able to do with magnetic fields. We can control multi-degree of freedom mechanisms. We can get objects or mechanisms to fold up and joints to bend. And we can do all this wirelessly. So in my lab, we've been spending a lot of effort in, okay, how can we fabricate devices that have these individually programmed tiny magnets on board? One way we can do this is through 3D printing. And we've been working a lot on, these are different versions of this same gripper arm. You can visualize the magnetic fields here, the magnetization of the device. And we can 3D print devices, but we still have a big challenge that it's difficult to make strong devices that have a lot of magnetic force. We need lots of magnetic particles on board the device. And so if we want to make medical devices, for example, for cutting tissue or doing sampling inside the body, we often use stronger commercially made permanent magnets and embed them into the device. Here's some more work we've been doing on 3D printing. We can make arbitrary three-dimensional devices with magnetization programmed how we like. So when we apply the magnetic field, the devices will fold up, or we can make little walking robots and things like this. Okay, so those are demonstrations to show the concept. Let's return to our two applications. We're going to start with going into the gastrointestinal tract. I've been working with a biologist who came to me, and he's been studying inflammatory bowel disease. In the US alone, there's 3 million people who have inflammatory bowel disease. It's thought that inflammatory bowel disease and other ailments of the gut and other areas of the body are largely affected or possibly even caused by bacteria and other microorganisms inside your gastrointestinal tract. And so if this is true, we may be able to treat gut health issues, including inflammatory bowel disease, with treatments like probiotics, which are non-invasive, inexpensive kind of treatments, alternatives to drugs or surgery for treating issues in your body. The problem is it's very difficult to study what's going on in your gastrointestinal tract. Imagine you wanted to do a study with hundreds or thousands of people, and you wanted to take samples of what microbes are inside your small intestine. We can do DNA and RNA surveys, so sequencing the DNA and RNA of bacteria inside a sample of intestinal contents, but it's very difficult to do, to get access in there, right? People do studies of stool samples. It tells you about colon bacteria, but different areas of the intestinal tract have very different microbiome or microbacteria populations, illustrated by these colored bars, each of which is a different population of bacteria in the gut. So we've been interested in sampling directly from specific locations in the gastrointestinal tract using a robotic type device. And so this is our device. We've made it as simple as possible. So it's not really a robot, it's just a sampling capsule. So we have this capsule, you would swallow it, your body would transport it on its own through the gastrointestinal tract, and we need some sort of trapdoor that opens up so we can take a sample inside the body. And we'd like to be able to open it at different locations and take samples so we could compare the bacteria and microorganism concentrations at different locations. So this is what we'd like to be able to do. Now, for some decades, there have been devices that are used clinically, so doctors will prescribe, and this is a camera inside a pill. There's a company, PillCam, Medtronic, that makes these devices, and you can get these videos of what it looks like inside your gastrointestinal tract. And lots of academic researchers have been working on making robotic versions of these tools that have a camera and maybe biopsy instruments, some sort of crawling mechanisms. But there's limited devices that can take samples of intestinal contents. So this is the device we've made to do this. We have a size limit so that you can actually swallow the device. Around 1 millimeter size in width is the maximum that a person will swallow. We need it to be able to survive the acidic conditions in the stomach and lots of mechanical agitation in the stomach. We want to be able to activate it wirelessly, even if we don't see it or we don't know where it is inside the gastrointestinal tract. And we want this device to be simple so that we can make many of them cheaply and do studies with this tool and potentially use it as a diagnostic tool. So this is our capsule. It consists of 2 magnets connected by a hinge, so that when we apply a magnetic field, the 2 capsule halves bend and the device opens up, exposing a chamber inside. So this is the first version of our device. Here we can easily open it. We just apply a magnetic field. We can do this at a distance of 10 or 20 centimeters, enough to go inside the body and open this thing. We've been doing experiments in pigs and we can actually feed these to the pig and activate the capsule. The capsule will pass through, and we can do studies like this. Now, we've done a lot of look at how we can get this device to seal up tightly so that we can take samples and have them not leak out. And so we've actually taken samples inside a live pig, and we have a lot of challenges doing tests in in live animals. Is much harder than doing it in the lab. Pigs in particular will chew up the capsules when they're taking them. If we want to use more than one capsule at a time, the capsules will actually stick together because they have magnets in them. So this is a challenge we continue to work on. But we have shown that our device can pass through a pig and we can take samples. Now, this requires us to, at the right time, be able to take this big magnet and wave it around the animal's body so that we can activate it. My student Priscilla worked on a version of this capsule which activates itself using smart materials. So it has hydrogel materials, and Priscilla is a chemical engineer who developed these hydrogels that respond to different acidity levels. And at the right spot, once it's left the stomach, the capsule opens up itself. If we want to be able to target a specific location in the gastrointestinal tract, we need to track where the capsule is, at least roughly. So we've been working on using ultrasound, which is a relatively low-cost imaging method. We can also use X-rays or fluoroscopy, which is like a X-ray video. This is expensive and, of course, exposes the patient to ionizing radiation. So we don't like to use that. So we've been working a lot on using ultrasound. This ultrasound probe is mounted on a robot arm, which we can use to track the capsule. Ultrasound images look like this in the lab. In real use, ultrasound images are much messier than this. The geometry of organs within your abdomen will cause many reflections of the ultrasound and make the image very difficult to interpret. Here you can see this is an automated tracking algorithm my student Xiaoyun developed to track the capsule. You can see what the capsule looks like here moving through. Here we're just moving the capsule manually and trying to track it. We've also working on putting little flashing objects onto the capsule to make it more visible on the ultrasound so we can track it over time with some more advanced signal processing to be able to track capsules. And we continue to work on improvements to our capsule mechanism. This is a newer version of the capsule which has a larger chamber inside and opens up in a very controlled kind of way. We continue to prove the safety of our device, and we hope to be able to do some experiments in humans soon. So we'd like to be able to do an inflammatory bowel disease study in humans, where we feed capsules one at a time to people and be able to study their diet and how their microbiome population within their gut is affected by things like diet or probiotics that they take. So that's a totally non-invasive kind of procedure for doing this sampling and diagnostics. Okay, last part of what I want to talk about today is circling back to the first application that I mentioned, which is going into the brain. So in the gut, the device I showed has the advantage that your body carries it through. So we don't really need robotic control for going into the gut. Now, sometimes you might want it to be able to target a spot more specifically, but if we want to do something like surgery in the brain, we need a more sophisticated robotic device. So here's the concept we've been working on, which is similar to the Da Vinci surgical robot. The surgeon would drive the device through teleoperation. We would have a small hole into the head, into the brain, where we can introduce our tool. So we have these are just like metal tubes, which are used to position the device. And then the wrist joint and opening and closing, grasping, and cutting tools at the end are going to be driven by a magnetic field. We need them to be a few millimeters in size to go inside the brain and operate deep within the ventricles of the brain. This is the first version of our tool. Here you see we have 3 magnets on board this tool. They're connected by these flexible hinges. These are spring, just metal wires there's two springs. There's a wrist and a finger spring. So it's a simple constructed device. 3 magnets operate just like the gripping robot that I showed at the beginning. Each of these magnets has a different magnetization direction. So when we apply a magnetic field to this device in different directions, here you can see the magnetic field that we're applying. We can bend the wrist spring, or we can bend, in a moment, we'll apply a different directed magnetic field, which closes the gripper. It's bending the spring here and grasping this device, grasping this just block of plastic for this demonstration. So we can move the wrist and the opening and closing of this thing independently. So this device has around 3 degrees of freedom that we can control. Now this device has a few issues. These springs don't have very much damping, so this device vibrates a lot. Maybe you can see a little bit of vibration happening here. We were trying to minimize that. The next version of our surgical tools uses pin joints instead of metal springs as the hinges. Originally, we thought pin joints would be bad because they have more friction, but the friction actually helps reduce the vibration of the tool, which is good. We do have to be very careful about how we make these to have not too much friction at the joints, and these are quite difficult to make at millimeter size. The whole device is around 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters in width, and so the hinges, these individual elements, are smaller than millimeter size. We can make them by 3D printing, barely. It's quite difficult, or we use precision machining. We can also use microfabrication processes like those inspired by microchip fabrication to make them even smaller. However, our device is actually limited by the strength of the tool, which is dictated by the size of the magnets. That's the gold colored blocks of the magnets embedded on this tool. I'll show you some videos here. This is just a rubber brain simulator here in our lab, and we put it into our coil system. Just to think about the size of these tools, I just showed you the first and second version of our tools. Here's some peanuts for scale. Compared with the Da Vinci surgical robot, which I showed a video of operating on a grape at the beginning of the presentation, you can see that we're something like half the size, a little bit smaller to half the size of those. In our lab, we have a large magnetic coil system that a master's student built. It has 8 electromagnets, and it can generate magnetic fields into the brain. So each coil generates its own magnetic field. Those sum up at one location, and we can insert tools. Here's me with the coils in the lab. All of these copper tubes are actually liquid cooling. The coils get very hot. They're quite large. We need a lot of electrical power and liquid cooling. We just use water from the tap to do cooling, which is adequate. And we've actually taken this system to the hospital to be able to do some trial surgeries in pigs. Here's this version of the tool with 2 magnets on board, which can bend the wrist and the opening and closing grasping of the tool. Here it is on top of the coils. There's the tool itself. And you can see, it's tethered. It has this physical connection, but the actuation itself is delivered completely by a magnetic field. You can see we can open and close the tool, and we can bend the wrist joint. This version of the tool only bends left-right. We can make a version that bends up and down as well, which is a little bit more complex and harder to control. We can introduce additional sort of secondary functions, like we can make the middle of the tool hollow, and we can put a laser down the middle of the tool, which can be used for cauterizing tissue. We can also flood water or suction down the middle of the tool as additional functions. In the end of the tool, it's just physically stuck on at the end here. It doesn't have any wires or other connections. Here's some versions of the tool which we've actually used in a live pig. We have a scalpel tool, which we can bend left and right. We have this gripper that I already showed that can open and close and has a wrist joint for more dexterous kind of manipulation. We can grab tissue with this and pull it. We've also been working on cutting tools. So this is a grasping forceps, which is used to take a sample of brain tissue. Takes a bite of brain tissue and stores it in the inside of the cutting tool here. It's difficult for us to get enough force to cut tissue. This version of the tool operates with a special type of a tiny wind-up mechanism. So there's a magnet which spins inside here and actually builds up more force. I don't quite have time to talk about our transmission mechanisms, but that's an exciting future direction we're moving in. Here's the tool. So it has this positioning bent curved tube here, which can insert the tool. Here you can see we can flood water through the middle for irrigating, for cleaning the surgical site. And here you see we can move it anywhere we like and bend the rest. So this is what it looked like when we went to the operating room. We have our coils here. The patient, we haven't done it in humans yet, but this is our vision for what that will look like. The patient's head will go on top, and we need to insert the tool here. So we use this set of motors to push the back end of the tool. We can use a fancy version of this called a concentric tube system, concentric tube robot, which can have multiple tubes, which can position the tool in a more sophisticated way, but that's not really necessary. We just need to be able to push the tool to the right location. And so we've been targeting, as I mentioned before, removing tumors or cutting significant sections of the brain for treating conditions such as epilepsy. I'll show you a few videos of work in the lab. The ones in the live animals are a little bit graphic, so if you want to see those videos, you can check out our research papers, which have videos. But I'll show you the ones in the rubber brain. To simulate cutting tissue, we use tofu, like the food, which has some similar properties to brain tissue, not exactly, of course. And we use some pieces of fruit, raspberries, for simulating tumors that we're trying to remove. So here we are inside the rubber brain. So it's dark. We have a light. We insert a camera next to the tool so we can visualize it. And here's the scalpel. You can see it's cutting back and forth. We can cut the tissue, or the tofu in this case, deep within the brain with the tool inserted with the camera next to it. Here's the grasping device going, and you can see the raspberries here, the fruit, and this is deep within the brain, inside the rubber brain, within those ventricles, those fluid-filled cavities within the brain. So you see we have a poor viewpoint, which is typical for minimally invasive surgery. This is with a camera, which is inserted right next to the tool. But we showed that we can cut tissue, we can pull on tissue, we can take samples. Here the tool can open and close. This is just being operated by a graduate student, not a skilled surgeon here. This is what our setup looked like in the operating room, or setting up for the operating room. You can see this is just the positioning device for the tool. Here's the magnetic coils, and this is the area where we put the live animal for doing some tests. We continue to work on proving our device, and you can check out, we had a science robotics paper which showed our work in using the device for operating within a pig's brain. There's lots of challenges still there. One issue we have is we'd like to be able to have two tools working together. So this is a demonstration of two of these magnetic tools coming together, one which is doing gripping on the left, and one which is a scissors doing cutting on the right. And these tools are a bit crude. They're not that precision, but we've been able to do independent control of these two. So each device has magnets that are oriented in different directions. And I'll need a whole nother talk to explain how we can do independent control. But you can check out my students' recent work on being able to do multiple tools controlling at the same time. I'll just talk about a few additional things here. We want to be able to track the tools. What are the angles of all the joints? So a PhD student in my group, Eric, has been working on if we have a view of the tool from a endoscopic camera, so a poor quality image of the tool that's a live image, can we use some neural network and detect, automatically estimate the angle of all the joints. And so we've been able to do this with some good success. It's quite a challenging problem, being able to do this just visually. If we could control where the camera was to be having a very good viewpoint, this would be great. But it's challenging because for a real surgery, we wouldn't have a lot of control over where the camera goes. So you see, we can track joint angles with precision of a few degrees, but we do get some errors occasionally, 20, 30, 40 degrees of joint angle error. So this remains a problem that we are continuing to work on, how we can track the tool bending angles while we're using it. Okay, so what's required to make these tools ready for use in real surgeries? We'd like the tool to be stronger. Cutting still remains a challenge, so we continue working on transmission type mechanisms, wind up mechanisms. Maybe tiny gears could work, but it's quite challenging at millimeter size. So this is just a prototype of another transmission mechanism. Of course, we need to have excellent control to be able to do surgery. So tracking the tool, as I mentioned, we continue working on ways of doing this with visual feedback. Maybe we can use magnetic sensing to track the angles of all the joints. And then how does the surgeon interface? So the surgeon's trying to drive the tool through certain motions. So this is a control problem similar to other robotic surgical problems. We want to control lots of degrees of freedom or lots of different types of motions simultaneously. Theoretically, we can use the magnetic field to control 8 different motions on one or more tools. So we're continuing to work on this and then proving our device like I showed. So I wanted to leave time for questions here. So this is all that I wanted to introduce. All the work that I showed here today was done by graduate students and a few undergrads working in my research group. So this is a picture of my group from last year with a lot of the surgical tool work done by Cameron here. The sampling capsule device, a lot of that work was done by Payman, but everyone in the group was contributing to different aspects of this work. Okay, so this is what I wanted to introduce for you. Happy to take questions.
Yes, anyone wish to ask any question, please ask.
Oh yeah, I see a question
Yeah,
written.
yeah. Thank you, sir, for your very interesting lecture. And we have learned too much things from this lecture. Sir, I have one query regarding the video presentation. Means when it's one kind of invasive technique, and when we are inserting the micro robot into the skin, so at that moment, how we are precising that first, which place we are inserting, and as well as when we are drilling, then there will be bleeding and something like that. And how we will ensure that it will not cut the some other tissues that are related into the mind. In brain, some very small tissues are there. So it will be very challenging things, means without interrupting other tissues.
I think you're asking about the surgical tool like this. I think you're
Yes, yes,
asking, how do we choose where to insert
yes,
the
yes,
tool,
yes.
and how do we avoid damaging the brain tissue as we
Exactly,
access?
exactly, sir, exactly.
Yeah, so how do we choose where to access the brain? Surgeons are expert at doing this, and a large part of doing real surgeries in talking with our surgeon collaborators is planning what the approach is. And so they have standard approaches that they use for particular procedures, whether they go through the side, the top, underneath, they go through the mouth, through natural orifices sometimes to get access. So they're weighing many factors. You mentioned damaging the tissue, that's a primary factor. And then, of course, what angle are we accessing from? That's going to be beneficial for actually doing the procedure. So our tool would be able to access from many different directions, and the surgeon would use some preoperative imaging like X-rays, MRI, to be able to do that planning so that they could have minimal damage to the tissue while still completing the surgery. So I don't know how to do that process, and that's what a skilled surgeon would choose that direction. Ideally, we could use a single access hole to do the whole procedure, although we may need multiple. And so minimally invasive procedures often use multiple small holes and have one tool accessing from this angle, another tool or a camera accessing from a different angle. So that may also be an option. Now, you asked about damaging the tissue. I was quite surprised when I started working with the surgeon at how rough they are working with brain tissue. And they actually are able to damage quite a lot of tissue and push the tissue aside. And the brain is able to recover, especially in children. Children have exceptional, it's called plasticity of the brain, is the ability to form new connections, recover from physical damage. And so, yeah, of course, there needs to be some damage to the tissue to be able to get access. We want to make the tools as small as possible so we can have the smallest amount of tissue that needs to be pushed aside to be able to get in there. And this rod here is called a trocar, and it basically can push into the brain tissue to get this access. And they use tools like retraction tools to push the brain tissue aside. And surgeons weigh all of these factors when they're planning a procedure.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for explaining and elaborately such a nice explanation. So we are very much grateful to you, sir, for giving your valuable time for this lecture. And we have learned too much things from here. Thank you, sir.
Great. I see a question in the chat, which I think is, it's where's the CV programming going from Misbahul? Is there an embedded microcontroller chip inside the micro gripper that we can show? No, we don't embed any computation or power or anything like this. There's no chips on board our devices. All of them are simply magnets and hinges connected together. And so all the computation, all the planning needs to happen off board, outside of the body. So we would have a computer outside the body, viewing with cameras or ultrasound or some method of knowing where our tool is. But the device itself is designed to be as simple as possible with only magnets and flexible hinges connecting the elements on the device so that we can make it as small as possible. There are people working on millimeter size or even smaller circuits, embedded electronics that can be fit onto tools like this. It's hard to power them. And then what do you even do with that computation on board? Like, you would use that to drive an electrical motor or something like this, but they're too small to have actuators even. So that's an emerging area, as well as tiny computers on board tools, but not ready to go on tools like this. Other questions?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I had a small question regarding the magnetic surgical tool. So, like, how do you even balance out the achieving a very sufficient gripping force and also maintaining a very precise control of the orientation, especially when we are using external magnetic actuation? Like, I have made a gripper before, but it was like very difficult to bring a balance in between two of this. So, how do you even achieve that?
Yeah, so you've highlighted two of the biggest challenges, the amount of force we can exert and then maintaining precision. So the force that we can exert depends on the volume of magnetic material we put on board the tool. So we want to make large sections of the tool occupied by magnetic material so we can fit the most magnetic material on board the tool. Of course, we use the strongest magnets that we can. Typically, we use neodymium iron boron alloy materials, which are the strongest magnetic response and have a permanent magnet response that doesn't get damaged. So that's all we can do on board the tool, unless we have a transmission mechanism that can amplify the force on board the tool, which is one way of doing that. The other way of getting more actuation is to use larger fields from outside. So we put our coils as close as we can to the operating space. I mean, for brain surgery, putting the coils right on the head would be the ideal, but of course that's really in the way. That's why we designed our system to be under the table so that the surgeon has lots of space to operate, but that makes the fields a little bit weaker. So with good engineering, we can create larger fields, but it also gets very expensive. The bigger fields you want to make, the larger your coils need to get. And then you need things like liquid cooling, which makes the systems very expensive. And very sophisticated magnets like an MRI machine end up costing $1 million for enormous field strengths. So we want to keep our device low cost as we can. Now, surgery is always an expensive thing. And this is a sophisticated tool, so it's not going to be able to be really low cost for something sophisticated like this. So the other side of this is the precision. So precision and force don't have to work against each other. We can achieve both. It requires us to have very accurate knowledge of what the field distribution looks like in space. So we need to have a very good mathematical model or experimentally calibrated model of the field distribution around the coils so that we know wherever our tool is, wherever the magnets on board our tool is, what is the exact field being created at that location, and how can we manipulate that through changing the coil currents. So this requires us to have very precise calibration of the field distribution over space. So we spend a lot of time and effort on measuring the fields and trying to have a some kind of calibrated model from coil currents to actuation, force, and torque. It's a challenging problem experimentally. We spend a lot of hours doing that. And there's lots of good papers published by other groups on how to do this in a sophisticated way, but it's not easy to do. So that's the primary thing driving the accuracy. And then it just comes down to we need to control the coil currents with a high level of precision. So we need well-designed electronics with feedback to be able to do that. So we can achieve precision. The bigger our system gets, the harder it is, but all that is solvable, I think, on the precision side. Not that it's easy.
All right, thank you so much.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. I'm Ranveer, and I'm a student of second year mechanical engineering here at NIT Silchar. I had a question that at the micro scale where there's a lot of noise and uncertainty, how do we achieve better control, like good control, because there's so much noise and uncertainty at that level?
Yeah, it's a good question. So noise will come from sources, anything that's not modeled in the system. So we have a mathematical model that describes how our system behaves. So anything not in that model, we would maybe call noise or disturbance. So in our system, we have electrical noise. We have desired coil currents that create the fields we want. So electrical noise will be induced. We have problems like we have high currents running through our coils, like 10, 20 amps of current. It's a lot of current. So we get electrical noise and interference between our control signal wires and our coil wires. They electrically interfere with each other, inducing currents in the neighboring wires. So that is actually a source of noise in our system that we have to do some good engineering and practical solutions for. And my graduate students spent a lot of time working on the electrical precision, coil current precision of our system. That's definitely solvable, and standard engineering techniques can solve electrical noise problems to an adequate level. Otherwise, we have disturbances in the environment, like the tool's going to touch the tissue in an uncontrolled way, and we can't usually predict that. So that's going to distort the position of the tool. And so we need good feedback on what's happening to be able to compensate for that. So usually our approach is we can't avoid all those disturbances, or maybe there's fluid flow, something blocking the tool. So if we can track the angle of the tool and location, we can design a controller that tries to compensate for that. So that's kind of the controls approach. And then we try and make our tool as resistant to disturbances as we can. So we try and make it strong. We try and make it stiff in certain directions that we don't want it to be bending accidentally. So all these things can help, but then it comes down to how well we can observe what's going on and compensate for all these problems that come up, because we can never reduce noise and disturbances to zero.
Thank you
And that's
so
a
much,
challenge for
sir.
any engineered system.
All right, sir. That somewhat clears my doubt, and your session has been really enriching. So I was thinking if I could send up a follow-up email to learn from you better, as I've been into this space. I've been trying to, learn new things. So that works.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to respond to any other questions or comments you have. Yeah, by email.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll surely email you.
Other questions?
Is there any other question? So I think we can end the session, sir. Ma'am, sir, anyone? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Well,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for your great questions and attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to talk about our work to some people who are interested and knowledgeable. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, yes, ma'am, please.
Sir, actually wanted to ask that means this is very special domain and very upcoming domain. So any means how we can go up to that means where to start the study, or how we can encourage the means I don't want to complete only this session with only one talk. Means it should help other students also to carry forward on this. So how we can move forward, like any we can arrange in because RAS is giving so much importance to like workshops and everything. So can we plan with that also? Like with you, if you are interested, then we can arrange some other talk or workshop.
Yes, I think you're asking about how to get started on this type of thing and what further
Means with only
knowledge.
one talk it is not possible to, like, because we are not studying this one like in our graduate course or any other courses. In fact, in postgraduate also we are not working on this or not studying any the basics of this one. So can we by doing workshop, or I think more lectures only, we can it will be possible. So it means if you are interested, then we can arrange uh, some other talks and also maybe lectures. Is it possible for you to give time?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I could also direct you to some other people working on similar areas if you wanted to hear about different. You raised questions about different aspects of my work, and other people are working on those as well, who I know. So you may be able to have someone give a talk on something related to this different area of interest. Yeah, I would be happy to continue a conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we can end the session, sir. So on behalf of IEEE Robotics and Automation Society and IT Silchar branch chapter, I sincerely thank you, Professor Diller, for your highly insightful and engaging session. Your work on flexible magnetic micro robots and their application in the gut and the brain has been truly inspiring for our students and research community, sir. We deeply appreciate your time and for sharing your valuable knowledge with us, sir. We hope to have the opportunity to host you in the future, possibly in person, sir, and explore potential academic collaboration if possible, as ma'am has already told. So I'm Vishal Prasad. I'm the Vice Chair of IEEE RAS and IT Silchar, and it's been my honor to host today's session, sir. Thank you once again, sir, and thank you all. So you can end the session.
Thank
sir.
you.
Bye,
Yeah,
sir.
Very nice
thank you,
talking.
Eric, sir, for giving your valuable time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good evening, everyone.
Same to
You
you,
too.
sir.
Have a good day, sir. To you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, Vishal.
Yes.
So I hope the lectures has been completed, and so you do the formalities like whatever the snacks and other things you have
Yes, sir. I will do.
you distribute, and after that you switch off the lights and other things from the
Yes, sir.
seminar hall and take the
Yes,
keys
sir.
with you, or you
Then
can
I'll
give the
submit it
keys
to.
to Devashish if he is there. You can call
Yes, sir.
him, you can give the key him, and the person who has taken the keys, next day you have to go and in the register you sign that you have returned the keys.